I thank you all for being here. My name is Emily Lovell, and I am a postdoc funded by UC Santa Cruz's open source program office. I have been working for a long time in the computing education landscape, especially around broadening participation and how we can support more people coming into and participating in computing. And so oh, great. I stumbled into open source as a really exciting place for student engagement, because I think it has a lot of potential to impact stuff like sense of belonging and STEM identity and opportunity for social impact, a lot of stuff that we know is important to attracting and retaining diverse students. And as many of you know firsthand, also, I think it's a really cool way to get experience with real world tools and build a technical portfolio. So all of that curiosity led me to some of the people who are here, like Spot from Amazon, who's sitting right next to me, Tom Calloway, and to participate in professional development workshops, develop an open source course at Liberal Arts College, and then now be shipping into what we're all here to talk about, the mentorship space, with the launch of a new program that our OSPO hosted this summer. And I'll say more on that in a moment, but first I'm just super excited to welcome and learn from our 4 panelists who are here today, whose work I'm really inspired by, who are 3 of which are heading up their own organizations and initiatives, and one of which, Onexi, who just joined us, recently participated in an open source mentorship program. So I'd like to welcome Kevin Wang, who's the founder of Mentors in Tech, also known as Mint, Tyler Menezes, the executive director for CodeDay, Kendall Nelson, who's a senior upstream developer advocate at Open Infra, and Onexi Medina, who was a Catalyst fellow in our new Catalyst program this summer. So I'd like to kick things off by giving you each a few minutes to introduce yourselves and the work you're doing, and then we can follow up with some discussion questions. Anybody like to start?
Yeah, I can go. My name is Kevin Wang, and I'm the founder of the Mentors in Tech program, where we help overlooked and underserved students from computer science students from community and technical colleges navigate the tech hiring ecosystem and help them launch their tech careers. And so part of our work is, industry career mentorship with industry mentors. But the other part that we do is help students, because very few of our students get internships because they're at schools that are not recruited by any of the big companies. We help them by using their senior year capstone program. We do open source projects, and that way they have work that they can show on LinkedIn through GitHub, and also experience working with large code bases and real software engineers, learn the engineering process and everything that they don't normally do in a classroom kind of a pre-packaged nice classroom project kind of thing. So yeah.
And I can go next. I'm a longtime partner of Kevin's with the organization I work with. So Tyler Menezes from CodeDay. And we also work with a lot of overlooked, underserved students, mostly from community colleges around the world, actually. Basically what we do is 2 things. We have these sort of micro internships. So we help students who are in maybe their sophomore, junior year. They have the prereqs done, but they haven't really done anything, outside of the classroom, and maybe, like a final project for one of their classes or something. We help them make their first pull request. It's often just a couple lines of code, really simple thing like a test or fixing a really small bug. And then we also have a summer program where we help them make their first substantial pull request. So that might actually be doing a brand new feature. We have somewhere around, I think like about 1,000 students a year going through these programs. We have 55 students who are actually just starting today with their first micro internship of the school year. So yeah, really excited to be with everyone and talk about getting students in open source.
I can go next. I am Kendall Nelson, a senior upstream developer advocate at the Open Infrastructure Foundation. So the Open Infrastructure Foundation hosts a number of open source projects focused on cloud computing, container runtimes, CI/CD, lots of different things. But my role specifically, I get to spend a lot of my time working with universities to integrate with curriculum that they already have and courses they already have to get students involved in our open source projects. So I am kind of the go-between for the communities and the professors to make sure that they have mentors and project descriptions around for the duration of the semester for students to work on. So I can find the work to be done and get you integrated into the community.
Which is super helpful to have that liaison. Yeah. Yeah, Onexi, would you like to?
All right. I'll go next. So hi, everyone. I'm Onexi, a senior computer science student at Norfolk State University. And as Emily mentioned, a recent fellow of the open source research experience at UC Santa Cruz. Kind of like Kevin and Tyler mentioned, I already completed my capstone project for my my senior project for my bachelor's degree. Here, I did a scheduling application for students to kind of auto schedule tasks that they would normally put and procrastinate on, right? A lot of people kind of struggle with that, which would have been really fun to do from the beginning as an open source project. I might consider doing that in the future. But yeah, just excited to be here and hear what you all have to say.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And I guess I can say a little bit more about our Catalyst program that we just started. It's just an overview. So we've had an existing program called the Open Source Research Experience that predates me, largely developed by Stephanie Leachy, who's triaging Zoom presentation so we can see you all right now. And OSRE really is a way for us. It started with partnering with Google Summer of Code to be able to have a partnership with students around the world working on academic open source projects. And then this summer is the first year that we piloted a new program with a residential component. So that was in partnership with Onexi School, Norfolk State University, an HBCU in Virginia. And we worked with one of Onexi's professors, actually, Dr. Thorna Humphreys, to really start to conceptualize the format of that program and work with students 4 weeks in Santa Cruz. There were four students in our pilot cohort, and then 4 weeks remotely, all as a pretty tight-knit group. And yeah, I guess with that, we can transition into some questions. So my first question for you all is, why do you think that tech mentorship programs are needed when there are so many books, classes, and other ways to learn technical skills now, with many of these being free even?
I'll go first. Yeah, I think mentoring, I think, is very different than it was maybe 20 years ago in tech, when I think a lot of students, I think people think as a blank slate. The students that we have now are deeply engaged in social media, whether it is, YouTube influencers that try to help you get a, six-figure job, or somebody on TikTok who tried to do that in 60 seconds, or on Blind, or on CS career questions, CS majors, those kind of subreddits. It's not like the students don't have no idea how any of it works. It's too much, and everyone is saying different things, so it becomes this sort of it's more whether they can discern the good advice from the bad advice and what that reality looks like. If you read stuff on a couple of months ago on CS career questions, nobody's hiring, we should all just become UPS drivers. They make 170 grand a year. That seems good. Let's do that, right? And so, and every other week it's something else, right? And so there's definitely good advice in those things, but they may not become the most upvoted ones or go to the top and stuff like that. And also, the students we work with are from non-recruited schools or schools that most people haven't heard of, or they're non-traditional students. So they have special circumstances that their four-year university peers usually do not face. And like translating previous military experience or previous job experience into something that tech recruiters or hiring managers would understand. So there's a lot of special circumstances for students that not necessarily like it would just immediately translate like for a traditional student, right? And so how do you demonstrate like competence, commitment, and compatibility into tech roles when you're coming from a role that's usually not recruited from the usual sources that are tech companies you usually hire from? How do we help those students into that space? So for all of those reasons more, having a industry mentor, both who are been hiring managers for a long time, as well as near peers who got a job within the past few years, having that one-on-one time, or having them invested in your success and actually get to know you, who you are, and can help you shape your story, help you with technical interviews, negotiations, manager one-on-ones. All of that stuff is super important, because a lot of the stuff out there is for four-year students, or traditional, more traditional four-year students. So our students do need some mentors, and it's a relationship they never had before either, right? Like they're not your like family, they're not your friends, they're not your like future work bosses, they're not your professor. So it's also kind of getting understand to build that relationship that they'll need in the future as well. So I talked about like 7 different reasons here, but like that's it's all a part of it.
Yeah. I wanted to just quickly jump in and add one more reason on that. The professors, the classes, the lecturers, all of those things are someone who knows exactly what to do, telling you what to do. And that's all students encounter for like 20 plus years of their educational career. And if you have a technical mentor, someone who's helping you technically, they don't know what they're doing. And that's the first time these students have seen that. And it's the first time they're seeing it demonstrated. How do you solve a problem when no one knows what to do? A lot of them don't even know that that's a normal thing, to feel like you don't know what you're doing. So that also is a pretty big one.
Yeah. To build off of what Tyler and Kevin were saying, like mentorship in general, I think there are a lot of benefits in both ways, both for the mentor in like being taught a different perspective and like, oh, this is what kids are learning in college right now. Like we need to approach problems from a different way. Maybe like I've only been thinking about the problem this way, and then a question that they ask to help them understand then changes your perspective completely. And there are a lot of benefits to the students in these mentorship programs in terms of like problem solving, like and seeing things worked through when you don't just know the information, like Tyler was saying, but building the relationships and like a network of people to work with in the future, and maybe use as role models in the future that aren't family or your future boss or things like that. It's another sort of influence on their trajectory in life, and a specific opinion and like set of context and experience from a single person, as opposed to being bombarded with everything on the internet, like what Kevin was saying at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Onexi, I noticed you smiling when Tyler made a comment about like seeing experts say like, I don't know. Did that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, I definitely want to say that I guess like more from the receiving end of the being a mentee, right? I definitely want to say that mentorship really helps in the sense of kind of guiding you towards like where you want to go, kind of like how everybody mentioned a little bit. There's a lot of information out there, and I know that in the different disciplines that I've encountered like throughout my degree, I've definitely been guilty of kind of looking towards every new opportunity that kind of pops up. I'm like, okay, so internship here, internship over there. stuff like that. And it can be very kind of draining to be told to kind of focus on one thing, but at the same time, not let pass up every single opportunity that kind of comes your way. And I think it's also very difficult to kind of like how Kevin mentioned, be able to, from a point of like no experience in real world industry, kind of look at information that's online and articles and stuff like that, and be able to debunk what information is something that's actually useful and what information was kind of just used to put that article out there and kind of push it out there and really push that information towards you. I think having a mentor can kind of help you narrow down what is actually like a real experience once you decide to do what you want to do. And within the goals that you have for yourself, kind of help establish those and build a plan. Because I think another thing that comes with, I guess, maturity within your education is being able to build up a plan, right? That's not something that everybody has at the beginning when you don't necessarily know what you want to do or like who you are exactly, right?
Yeah, totally. I think you all covered like so many great points. I think the only things I would add are I like especially enjoy like the sort of process of getting to know someone like through that relationship building and getting to learn about, like, to Onexi's point, like what somebody's specific interests or specific goals are. I feel like a lot of other kinds of opportunities sometimes are just more trapped. Like this is the tool to get to a certain endpoint, and mentorship leaves open space to explore, like, what are you interested, like where are you trying to get, like where could you get if you tried this other thing. So I really enjoyed that part of it as well. And the other thing that I would add to is like that I've seen a lot in my relationships with students is mentorship is like such a useful place to be able to workshop like soft skills, like communication and collaboration. And that's like one of the most written about things, Onexi, from your cohorts, like surveys and blog posts and everything, was just that the opportunity to like really practice at, you know, like amongst yourselves in a team, whether it's class or a small cohort of students working together, but also like being able to have somebody to check, like, hey, like what do you think of this Slack message before I send it to this whole community that I've never talked to before, or before I like post on this GitHub issue that all these people are gonna read. So yeah, Jonathan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to zoom in on that for a second, because I think mentorship is more than putting a GitHub pull request together, right? It's a lot of what you were just describing. Open source is a very big, intimidating ecosystem, philosophy, way of life, sort of. And if you are just doing a university track to go through university, then go to industry, that's great. You're going to have a completely different experience than if you're trying to enter the open source arena. So I think mentorship plays a great role in exactly what you're just describing. Like, this is how you maybe introduce yourself to an open source community. Don't go in too headstrong, you know, you're going to be proven wrong. You have that rite of passage that you're going to go through no matter what. And it's beneficial to do that with someone who's gone through it before and with other people who are also going through it at the same time, because it builds that sense of community that you might make friends you'll be friends with in 30 years, 40 years. And you see this in other industries that have mentorship programs too. It's really neat to see.
Yeah, totally. And I love like the back channel conversations I see around this stuff too, when someone like fires off the message and everyone's like waiting for the reply, or like, you know, waiting for a PR to get merged and having people to like celebrate that with, or, you know, like you're saying, just having community around that. But that's actually a great segue, what you brought up, Jonathan, to my next question, which is really open source specific. So thinking, zooming in from mentorship to open source mentorship, I'm curious to hear from you all what you think makes open source a unique arena for tech mentorship. Like, why are you choosing, each of you, to work in an open source context specifically?
It lets me do what I want to do at my own time.
Yeah, that's a totally great aspect. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have, I think, go ahead, Tyler.
I was just going to say quickly, I mean, so we actually have I think an interesting perspective because we started out not doing open source. We tried students proposing the projects, and the problem with that is that the student projects are not realistic or useful, and they don't know what they don't know, so they're not learning skills that are relevant in the industry. And we tried mentors proposing the projects, that was fine. Like, that was definitely better, but building a project from scratch is not really what most people are doing when they go to work for their first job out of school or something like that. They're usually contributing to an existing code base. And so when we did a survey of folks who were hiring managers or work with new grad hires, and we asked them, like, what are the skills that you're seeing? What are the skills that you're not seeing that you really want to see? Students, don't have a lot of experience with the sort of software engineering process, right? They don't know how to debug a problem. They don't know where to, look. If they have 5,000 files, they don't really have any experience going and figuring out what files to make the change in. Like, how do you even approach that? And that's something that doesn't get taught. So we've just sort of, we still have some mentors who want to propose their projects, and we support it if they want to, but most of the students now are working on open source. Like 95% are doing open source. And like, we've just seen that the skills that they develop there are more directly transferable to their first job when they get out of school. Also, the other thing is, like, a lot of students just really like this idea that they're really making an impact on the world. They're making a pull request that is going to be used in software that's used by 10 million people or something in some cases, right? We've had students contribute to like Python or Linux. That's huge, and that's really motivating for students to see that come to fruition in a way that non-open source projects usually don't.
Even as like a young professional, when I got in to my first job and I started working on open source, and I was like, wait, that code I just landed is being run at CERN and Blizzard and what? Like, that's awesome. So yeah, definitely can agree that that's a really big bonus of the open source world. Also, the variety of roles that like a student can be exposed to, because all of the people collaborating on that particular project are using the project in different ways and in different contexts. And in talking to the people in the community and like asking questions and getting to know them, you find more information to help inform where you want to go with your career. And like, that seems annoying, I don't want to do that, or maybe that is something to explore more, that type of role. And you also end up developing like a huge network of friends and coworkers at a lot of different companies and in a lot of different countries. And I like the benefits of working in open source are enormous as a individual, let alone the companies that actually are making use of the open source. But the other thing that I think is really important that it teaches people is it forces a sense of like humility and like from being challenged when you push code or push documentation and they're like, maybe you didn't understand that quite right, like let me give you some more context and help you understand better for the future so that you can teach others. But you also get to understand different cultures, both of the open source project itself and of the people that are contributing to it, especially if it is a global open source project like OpenStack or Kubernetes or what have you. Dealing with time zones and all of the communication struggles around that are like intensely important skills that are wildly applicable in life and in careers and all down the road.
Yeah, there's so many like good. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying there's a lot of heads nodding in this room. Yes, to all of that.
Yeah, there are just so many like I think wins for students. I think with open source that I think we much like Tyler, we started with industry projects because that's where when working with colleges, that's what colleges want, right? It's like we want industry projects. And there's a lot of these like little wins that add up to a lot. For example, when our students worked on a industry project, you had to sign NDA. So for every project, you almost need a lawyer to like go through all of this stuff, and they can't post their code. No one knows what their code is. And so it's left during the interviews, it's left up to the student to describe what they did. If it's a big company, then people will believe you. If it's a small company and something a little bit more esoteric, it's very hard to for the students during interviews to kind of advocate for themselves, like on exactly what they did, what their role is, open source, GitHub link, you know exactly what they contributed. And so that makes it a lot easier, I think, for the students in the hiring process. And yeah, we work with GitHub. And we had, you know, mentors from Amsterdam. So they gotta, you know, it's the first time they got to work with somebody, you know, overseas. And then also, you know, one of our teams did the GitHub command line interface dash browse. So they can all be, you know, you can go anywhere and say, our student team did that. And everyone's like, oh, I know what that is. Or, you know, like it is versus some closed thing. And you kind of have to describe it and people just kind of have to believe you. And then I think the open source projects also leads to just naturally three big things that students, I would say sometimes confidently incorrect, that like our program needs to improve on, when in reality, that's actually what we want to teach them. And so one thing is, you know, the projects are often like just a huge code database and things are a little bit ambiguous. And then also, you know, drinking from a fire hose, right? Because normally when the students build the projects themselves, they come up with the idea, whether it's a bus scheduling thing or a class scheduling thing or a restaurant reservation system, like they know, or even if they go work with a local small business, you know, local dairy farms, like inventory system, like they get to build it from the ground up. But very few people get to actually do that in real software development. So not everything is like prepackaged in a neat little box. It's much bigger. So the students are not used to that. And so having them and say, this is what it's really like, is a huge eye opener. The other thing is just the level of ambiguity. And sometimes they thought they're going to do this. They end up spending on something and doing something else completely different as the solution. And that happens in, you know, engineering everywhere, but the students don't know that, right? Like a regular class project, hey, you know, you're gonna do a database project here, and you need to add several functions or whatever here. That's very self-contained. There's no way you're going to be doing something else. But a lot of development leads to that as well. And then lastly, your mentor / manager don't know all the answers. They're here to, right? I think in the classroom, the professors built a project. They know exactly what the end, you know, they have a, you know, testing thing, and, you know, you kind of go up against that. You submit it 50 different times and you pass all of their tests and you've done your project. That doesn't quite happen in real software development either. And so your manager have a general idea and they can help you, direct you. And that's also really foreign to the students. Someone doesn't already have a copy of the answer sheet already. So I think these three things in open source, as well as a lot of the other things that we talked about, are all benefits, I think, for students to do open source. That gives them an experience, I think, that's way more closely, you know, that is actual software development that they couldn't get in any other sort of classroom setting environment.
Should I just make sure that we get two aspects into this discussion before we move forward? I'll be very, very brief. In open source, you don't need to be a university student to participate in it. You don't need to be in any structure at all. You can be whoever you want and participate and mentor. A lot of these mentorship programs actually encourage that. We're doing a pilot where our mentee is a history major, like been out of school for a long time and now learning how to code software and commit to repositories. And the other part is you don't need to be a coder. You don't need to be contributing lines of code to these projects. You can be a non-technical contributor, and these mentorship programs really help bring those people in as well. I guess there's a third one, I'm sorry, but it falls back to, this is a philosophy. Open source is a philosophy with books written about it. It's got extremists, and it's got people in the middle, and it's got conservatives. Like it's not just GitHub. It is so much more. It's a way of interacting with technology and sharing that technology with the world.
Yeah, Jonathan, could you share a little bit about where you're from? You mentioned like being involved with also?
Oh, yeah. I'm program manager at the Open Source Science Initiative out of NumFocus.
Cool.
And I work with several open source initiatives, and I've helped steward an ecosystem in a fringe world of open science or open source that's a couple dozen projects strong at this point.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us and adding that perspective. And yeah, I think that's such a great point about all the different ways that people can contribute to projects. In fact, I was going to ask Onexi if you could say just a little bit about the kinds of contributions you worked on this summer, because I think Onexi actually is a great example of someone who Onexi came in really interested in UI UX work, but you ended up working on some other, things in the processing P5 community that were specific to skills that you had.
Yeah, just to go off of that, so there's definitely a lot of things that open source kind of opens the doors up for. It's very fun to, I think, from my perspective, right, from what you guys were mentioning, definitely open source specifically, I think, on top of these other fields, definitely doesn't have kind of like a script of kind of how to go about things or like a structure. Kind of have like a general guide of how to kind of go with it, but it's really up to you and what your kind of creativity allows for, and that's something that I definitely really like about that when I was learning about open source. So to talk specifically about the contributions, I was very interested in UI UX, and very fortunate to at the end. Towards the end of our program, contributed to a design library for JavaScript called P5JS. But instead of kind of going towards something of design, I took a look at their code references, right, where they kind of explain and what their methods and stuff do to everybody else in the community. And I was able to apply my Spanish, because I can speak Spanish as well, to be able to kind of revamp their references page so that they can have more accessibility that way towards other people that are looking into that. And not only that, but we also worked on other projects within the program that definitely required some other different skills that I thought that were not applicable within the field. So I think that's very interesting in that way. I'm more so liking open source for the fact that there is no script and there is no direct way to go about it. So really kind of like the sky's the limit with experimentation and what you want to implement.
Yeah, totally. I think the only other thing sort of on that, on this topic of like why open source, someone else mentioned it already, but I find really compelling is like the ability to contribute to something that aligns with your values or your interests. Even if it's not like your first open source experience, like just once you have the tools, you can go, like I've heard that from students, like, oh, now I know how to look at different communities and see like which ones might be good places for me to work in the future. Like what would be the first steps that I would take? Because I think it can be really motivating to work on something, whether it just aligns with like a personal interest that you have. That was how we landed in the processing P5 community, was the students chose that project from sort of a short list, or something that aligns with, some way that you want to actually impact the world. So I think that's really cool too. Okay, my next question for you all is, there are a lot of different programs offering open source mentorship. So we represent just a handful of them. For example, I'm thinking of like Outreachy, MLH fellowships, Linux Foundation has some mentorship efforts. GitHub has led some initiatives. So I would love for you each to speak a little bit to what distinguishes your programs or your efforts from other programs in this space. Some of you have covered this a little bit already, but I think it's nice to recap.
Kevin said this really nicely earlier. I think for the two of us, both of our programs, we work a lot with students that are just sort of overlooked by a lot of other groups. MLH, for example, is great. They've been a partner of ours in other ways for a long time. Linux Foundation is great. Like, everyone out there is great, but I think they all serve a different demographic of students. And so I don't mean this to say like we're better than them because we work with these underserved students or something. I think everyone deserves an opportunity to do this, but all the students need something slightly different. And just building one program that works for everyone, I don't think really makes it work for anyone. And so I think for Kevin and I both, we sort of really have focused in on these sort of underrepresented, overlooked, like community college students, and the students who come from these sort of really non-traditional backgrounds. That's kind of our bread and butter, so to speak.
Yeah, the whole reason we work with the population we do is that, previously to this, I founded the Microsoft Teals program, works with a lot of high schools to get computer science into the high school level. And I think, all the studies back then were like, hey, if somebody takes computer science, they'll 9 times more likely to be to major in computer science, especially if they're underserved minority students and so on and so forth. And turns out that's really true if our students end up at a traditional 4-year school, especially the elite schools. Then I think that pathway is well understood, and the students are set in terms of future success and entry into a technical role, and all of the economic benefits and future that comes with. But then we also realized a majority, because we go to majority Title I high schools, a lot of our students, by the time we get to junior, senior year in high school, and for family circumstances and responsibilities outside of schools, many of them are not able to access those sort of R1 type schools. They don't have a chance to go. A lot of our students have family responsibilities. They work in the military, and really the only colleges now left in the United States that are accessible and affordable are now these community and technical schools. They're now the only 4-year options you can get that's under 10 grand a year. And that's really the backbone of American economic and social mobility. That's super important, I think. And these are the schools that names you never heard of, but if you look at the amount of CS degrees and how many people major in computer science, they actually are a majority of the CS students in the United States, outstripping the R1 schools as well. But nobody ever talks about them, right? Everyone looks at the usual suspects, and nobody recruits there. And I think there was a recent New York Times article talking about CUNY, who serves a very, the City University of New York, who serves a very, very similar demographic as community colleges. And, their CS program's been around for like 10 to 15 years now, and only half of their students, 4-year CS students, get a job in tech 1 year after graduation. And only 10% of their students have ever got an internship. Right. So these students are caught in this weird catch-22 situation where recruiters or, companies look at the brand name of the school you go to. And then if you had also brand name internship, and, our students have access to neither. So how do they actually break in? Right. And these are the students that tech for a long time, if you go to everyone's recruiting pages, that's who they're looking for. But they're not looking at a very, very obvious set of students, because also it is difficult to go recruit at a small school where your computer science department is only graduating 15, 20, 30 students a year, versus you go to a big school, you're graduating 300-400 students a year as well, right? So that's, it makes it harder on us to do this job, but I think it's so important to do that job and to do right by these students, that really honors all the work that folks in computer science education have done in the past 2 decades, if not more. So
Yeah, I think that the work that that you're doing, Kevin and Tyler, is so cool. I remember finding you both at Open Source Summit and talking to you, and just some of you know, I taught previously. I spent 3 years teaching at a school that many people have never heard of, small school in the South, that exclusively serves students who would otherwise lack the economic means to attend college. And so yeah, I think it's so important for there to be all these different avenues, as you said, that are complementary in serving different student populations and non-student populations. Yeah, Onexi?
Yeah, just wanted to advocate a little bit for what kind of Tyler and Kevin's program stand for. I want to say that from my personal experience, I'm from Puerto Rico, so in high school and stuff like that, I definitely didn't have the means to even like kind of come to college. I didn't have enough credits to kind of apply for most of the U.S. colleges that I wanted to come for. So I definitely had to get some external community college education to even come over. And I was fortunate enough to be able to study in the States with scholarships and stuff like that. And some financial help. So I think it's very cool that you guys look towards like smaller schools or like doing outreach towards otherwise overlooked people.
So the program that I have built up at our foundation approaches everything very differently, because we come from the side of the open source projects, and knowing that a healthy open source community takes a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and perspectives and use cases, and representing all of that. So in order to make our open source communities more healthy and sustainable long term, I want to like engage with as many people as possible. And there are already people at the foundation that work with companies directly to get them involved, but I think that universities are a untapped resource largely. And there are a lot of benefits on both sides, as we've already discussed. So I personally am like a single go-between for matching our open source communities like OpenStack and Kata containers and Zool that have bits of work that we know we want to do, but maybe don't have people to work on, but do have community members willing to mentor students to accomplish that work. So I link them up with various university programs and professors that I know are getting ready for the next semester and have like a fundamentals of cloud computing course or have a capstone course. And they're looking for projects that students can accomplish over the course of the semester. So I collect those from our open source communities, and I connect the professor with the people that are going to be doing the mentoring within those communities. And then we have an awesome time all semester long and end up with really excellent results. A number of students that have gone through some of these programs have actually gotten hired by the companies who also employed the mentor that they had, because the mentor went off and was like, you know, we really liked working with this student and they're about to graduate. Like, here's their resume. Let's get him in the short pile of resumes to go through and try to get them hired. And that's happened a couple times. And every single time that happens, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly what we need in open source. We need more people learning the tools from earlier. And then it also provides like benefits to the company, because the student is already like pre-onboarded to the technology in the community, and they're coming in with experience, but maybe they're also cheaper than that like 20-year developer that you thought you were going to hire. And yeah, there's so many good things about it, and I get so much good energy from working with the students and the professors that are really excited to see students engage in open source projects.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Kendall. I think that's such a cool affordance of working in this space, as well as those relationships with industry and making like real connections and opportunities, you know, that naturally arise out of these types of relationships.
Yeah. one other thing that I've started doing was at the end of these courses, like in the last couple weeks, I try to get one of the like member companies of our foundation to talk about what it's like to work at that company and like information about hiring, jobs that are opening. I also have personally helped with like resume review and stuff like that to really try to make sure that they have a job at the end when they graduate.
Yeah, we're getting ready to bring some of the summer students to a conference this fall to All Things Open, which I'm really excited about. Onexi is gonna make it there. And are you in the job market, Onexi?
I am, yeah, definitely right now.
Yeah. So, you know,
Some references you
pretty
can
neat.
get.
Yeah.
I have a few references in this room. Like,
Yeah. Some good connection building.
recommendation.
Okay, so my last big question for you all before I have a couple of questions for Onexi, and then
Can I ask a quick question, a follow-up question before we move on to the next topic? Because we're just starting experiments with ours. I'm just curious with the programs that all are awesome and we hope to learn from and incorporate some aspects into what we're building. But with your programs, do you read books as well? Do you read like Cathedral and Bazaar? Do you read Open Letter to Hobbyists? Or is it all about GitHub code commits sort of stuff?
We point students towards some of those resources and we try to give them some resources going into it, but they're excited to do something, I think, more than they're excited to read, first of all. And then hopefully once they've done that first thing, then they're more interested in reading the books and things like that too. But we do point them toward it, but it's not a prerequisite.
What about like licensing and the different licenses and that entire, I don't know what kind of yard it is, a graveyard?
Yeah, no, I mean, same
nightmare.
Yeah. Same sort of thing for us, at least. Like the students don't really know why they should care about a lot of that stuff coming into it. And so it's once they've actually made the contributions and stuff like that, a lot of them get more interested. Some of them are interested earlier and then they reach out to us and then we kind of point them to that earlier. But we have kind of this whole flow of like, get them into it as soon as possible. And then once they're excited, then we can start to give them more of that information.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would say a lot of students literally just don't know what they don't know. They've heard the term somewhere. Some students are more into it than others, but then like the door opens once they actually been in it and have done some of it and kind of learned by doing, and then they kind of then that, and then the professors do have their own the class we're embedded in. Also, they have their own sort of reading and stuff, but most of that's more about project management, but they do teach a little bit, a primer of kind of open source stuff a little bit that at the beginning for the students that are going to be working on open source projects. And our mentors know all of these things. So during the weekly, meetings they have with their mentors, some of these things inevitably comes out. And so it's just kind of by osmosis.
Sure.
I've done it kind of both ways, Jonathan, like with and without reading. I usually don't do a ton of reading, but I have asked students to read like at least the main essay from Cathedral and the Bazaar, and we have a discussion about that. We also have a discussion about how some of the things I think represented in that book are kind of like dated or not super like inclusive in ways that I hope to find in open source now. So I think that some of those texts can be like really interesting ground for like fertile discussion about like, well, like what do we want open source to be? And like the cool thing is like open source is made by the people, so we can, adapt in these different ways. And then I have experimented with other things. This summer students read a newer book called How to Open Source by Richard Schneeman. I don't know if any of you know him. He's a Ruby developer who's also maintained a lot of libraries, and so he kind of wrote that book from a like maintainer, like with some maintainer perspective, and Onexi could speak to whether that was useful or not.
Yeah, definitely going off of that, I want to say that from a student perspective, I'm definitely not much of a reader. I definitely learn more by doing, get more excited by doing, kind of like how Tyler mentioned. But in terms of the book that we were able to read at the OSRE program, I'd say it was definitely helpful to kind of do something first and then kind of read a chapter of the book about the thing that I just did. And then it kind of helped put everything into an overall kind of context. I don't think that one could be understood without the other, but I think that definitely more so doing got me excited for reading the chapters and actually knowing that I comprehend on a physical level what the book is describing.
Yeah, lots of different answers. Okay, the last question I wanted to ask you all as a group is, what do you think is missing from the open source mentorship landscape? Like, if we had infinite resources to further this kind of work or scale this kind of work, where should we invest that?
Yeah, I think there's two spaces that I think would be super helpful. One is I think more open core companies and foundations also look at students, more non-traditional students. I think that's one. The other one is, because you're working with non-traditional students, having stipends or honorariums for the students make a really, really big difference, as both recognition of their time and their effort, and also helps them out a lot as well. So I think those are the two things. Is it is a community, everyone pitches in, and just having those to folks in the community and be like, yeah, like let's just raise our hand and meet some students otherwise we would not have met. And having companies and foundations who have the financial resources to sponsor some of these student projects as an investment in the future of open source is, I think, a good long-term investment in the health of the open source community.
I would definitely agree with having like money to be actually able to pay the students working on this. Obviously, open source is contributed to by a lot of people with different backgrounds, and some people don't need the money, but some people can't afford to invest the time if they're not being compensated for it. So I work at a nonprofit foundation, so like we don't have a whole lot of money to put towards things like being able to support outreach internships. We do try to budget like a little bit of money, but we would love to be able to support more people from backgrounds that can't just invest the time because they have an abundance of time and are all set up and everything. So yeah,
then you're self-selecting for a whole nother group of students again, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's kind of the thing. I'm not saying we need to pay our students like Microsoft, Google summer intern kind of money, but having some sort of stipend or something there will be super, super helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like Kevin and I also can't really pay our students. Like we, sort of resort to finding other people that are willing to pay our students too. But the only thing I wanted to add to is just I think that there's a big disconnect still between open source and career readiness sort of stuff. And I think that like we know that most students who are studying CS are doing it ultimately because they want to get a career, right? Like hopefully they like it. I think most of them like it, but also like they want a job. And I think that most of the focus on open source right now is still not really connected with a lot of the folks that are doing career readiness and helping students transition into things. And like as someone, I think, Kendall, I think it was you who mentioned this, like, getting student mentors to, recommend them for jobs. A lot of people are not doing that in any structured way, right? A lot of these open source contributors that the students are working with work for these really big tech companies that the students want to work for. And there's no structured pathway to try to like encourage them to say, hey, did you have a good time working with the student? Maybe that's, sort of better than your 1 hour whiteboard coding interview in a sense, right? And I don't think that there's anyone who's doing a lot of work there.
Definitely better than a 1 hour interview because you've had time to establish a relationship. You've had time to like learn if they're willing to learn and willing to communicate, how they communicate, how they develop and approach problems and stuff, which you try to do in that 1 hour whiteboard interview, but like it's a 1 hour interview? Like, what can you possibly hope to actually learn about somebody, especially when they're nervous and being put on the spot like that over the course of a whole semester, getting to know the student, you know, the person by the end of it reasonably well, at least.
So at the end of our project, we intentionally do that because sometimes the students are so in the project and they like got to check in because it's the end of the school year. So what we actually do is like their last 2 weeks, we actually have, you know, star interview questions and have the mentors actually go over, you know, be like an interviewer. Well, tell me a time when you're, you know, XYZ, and then they can use some of the stuff they did in the past quarter to actually come with that. So we ended up explicitly doing that because the students sometimes just forget. And by the, you know, it's like the school year, right? It's over, bye. Right. So how do we help them remember some of these things and do reflections and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yeah. And connecting their experience to the interview question that they're going to be asked when they go to interview, and like putting it in that context, because some people think of them as completely distinct things, not related, and connecting the dots for them is probably really helpful.
Would there be value if the person who's sucked into a project and so into it that they forgot that they're doing this to get a job outside of it? Would there be value if they could just stay on that project and get paid for continuing on that project?
Yeah, a lot of our students keep working on the project as open source contributors. Like when their mentor is gone, they like almost half of our students keep making pull requests. So clearly they love it. And yeah, I mean, it would be amazing if they could actually get a job doing that with the companies that they're working with.
Yeah, it would be. So I think this is a very good question. First, so I see it as like there's the open source stack. There's a whole ecosystem that has a lot of problems to it. Mentorship is the on-ramp. It's a very good way. It's got to grow as more programs, more mentors, more mentees, more money for all of it, more community around the different programs, more community around the mentees. Like the medical residency program has been around for thousands of years. It's a great open source mentorship program that works very well. So we should learn from that. And then to fix or to improve the mentorship program and keep people in open source, we should fix sustainability in open source. So there is funding. You can make a career out of working in open source. You don't need to fall in love with this philosophy and this way of doing stuff and then go to industry to use your skills over there. You can do that if you want, but you can also stay in open source and make just as much money contributing to some of these great projects. So it's more than just what does mentorship need, it's what does open source need.
This is where we love for open core companies. I think that's like the best. You don't have to go out of your way to kind of best fit, because we do know that I think some of our efforts, just by the nature of who we work with, attract attention from DEI or outreach and those type of departments, HR within the companies. And as we've seen over the past year, those departments and folks have been, you know, severely impacted. And so we need to, I think, long-term work into a sustainable pipeline into the engineering teams, and not just like, oh, this is something we do for, you know, kind of on the side, but into a main source, especially for companies that are relying on underlying open source projects as the base or the foundation for their.
It's scary though, because if you're a company that relies on underlying open source contributions, eventually you write that out of your code. Apple did this. So you need to be able to, open source is open source, stay with open source. And if you keep feeding open source into industry, there's the risk that it just becomes proprietary over time.
I was going to ask you Kevin, to define open core, because what I'm thinking of open core is like not good for businesses generally.
Open core means different things to Kendall and I. We just want to make sure you mean the same thing.
There's also, I think there's also a spectrum as well, right? I think there's a spectrum kind of where certain companies are on their kind of business and stuff like that. But I'm just saying it's not just one sort of open source spectrum should own this. It's the entire spectrum. that benefits from the overall open source community, and people can play into or contribute and play into this the way they can, because there's too many students to just have one sliver of it contributing or working.
Yeah, you are completely correct there. The breadth of the broad community and the types of projects and the way they are produced and consumed it's an entire economic marketplace. There is no one solution to it.
Steph, did you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna add, we kind of moved on a little bit, but the discussion about being able to identify students and not using that whatever 1 hour whiteboard interview and these internships being useful. We found that in the academic field, because so the open source research experience program started, as Emily mentioned, through us working as a GSOC mentor organization. And one of our kind of current star PhD students came to us originally as a GSOC student. So we started working with him on one of our projects and just realized, wow, this person is a superstar, but they would never had made it through a PhD application to UC, any UC, even UCSC, I shouldn't say it like that, but including UCSC, because his background was kind of, wasn't from a top university. He didn't necessarily have a number of things that really like made him pop on from what normally gets looked at from a CS PhD student. So it's not just, I think what I found interesting for him was it wasn't just the industry sector, but also from academia. We've used these mentorship programs have been a great way of identifying these star students. And Carlos, who my boss here at UCSC, I had to actually fight hard to get this particular student, JG, reviewed, because he's like, we know this person, he's a superstar. He's like, and we knew him through our mentorship program, and exactly what you were talking about. It was actually, he ended up doing 2 sessions before he got, so he was like, it did summer internship, and then we had him as a different mentor for the following summer. So we knew him so well by then. We were like, yes, he is like the perfect PhD student for our group. And so it's those options as well, even so not just for industry, but also like looking to diversify the backgrounds of folks coming through. Academia and computer science, these mentorship programs are also something to function. And our program, we've really since the beginning only used some sort of, like all students get a level of stipend of some sort. So we try to make sure it's always funded. And I get that that's super hard. We do it through sponsorships, we do it through GSOC, we do it through whatever, we do it through, we patch it together in different ways to make sure folks are covered. But I think that's also something, like, it's just something that our experience, I can totally see where a couple of you came from with the idea of like, this is, and I liked the idea also of, I think it was Kevin that was saying, making them kind of go through the work that they were doing prior to ending their session, so they understand how to bring that through an interview. And that makes me now go like, oh, these lightning talks that I keep forcing my students to do, maybe that is actually a good thing, because and I will now phrase it as, think of this as your job interview, and you're explaining what you do, and then you get really good at it and you will show what you did. And so actually I'm glad you brought that up, because it makes me realize one thing that I want to tweak, I think, towards our internship programs, or sorry, our mentorship programs, is that idea, is this is your next step to your job, and how best do you describe what you did. So
yeah, absolutely, Stephanie. That was something so the experiment we just ran this past summer, we built an internship experiment where another professor and I were co-teaching in the classroom, but the students were doing a heavy lift with projects from Kendall's world. But the thing that was, this other professor, this was at CMU with Michael Hilton. So he kind of runs the undergrad S3D programs. And the thing he wanted to hammer home was software engineering, communication skills are everything. And so at the end of the first month, second month, and end of the course, we had the students up in their teams, because we forced them into teams to force them to learn to communicate with one another. And they had to give basically team presentations, short ones at the end of the first and second month, but a proper one at the end of the last month, describing what they did and what they learned, kind of thing. And watching the growth in the students was amazing. And this was a small cohort. This was 16 of them. But it was just shocking to see their communication skills and the confidence. And this was one of the unfortunate ones that we had, unfortunate situations. So this was CMU undergrads. They were all juniors. They just finished the junior year. They weren't getting enough internships. But when we looked at the cohort, 3/4 of the cohort were young women. And it's like, yeah, we've all seen the situation where a guy who sees, 2 things on the list of 10 goes, yeah, I could do that job. And the woman needs to see, 9 before she'll put her hand up. And it was a joy to watch these 9 young women, the confidence growth in them over that 3-month course period. Not just their skill sets, but their actual confidence and their ability to mentor one another as part of it. I mean, yeah, Michael and I were doing some mentorship. Kendall gave us some great projects. And so we had some fabulous industry mentors at a Red Hat on the tech side for the projects. But watching them learn to mentor one another and teach one another as well, and just watching that confidence curve was just amazing.
Yeah, I think some of the more successful universities and the course structure that I work with are very similar to that, where it's a group of students working together on a project that I have matched them with, and they have a community mentor, but they do a lot to help each other, and they bounce ideas off each other, and they get more confident among that group, and then they get more confident as a group working in the open source community, and then they can teach those skills to the rest of the class. Because I think North Dakota State University also does presentations. I think it's at like midterm and then at the end, and they also record those and put them on YouTube even. So there's even more pressure, but they do really well.
That's awesome. I'm curious, with any of these programs, but even specifically to you, because you mentioned a 16-person cohort, which it's not small. Do they stay in touch? These people, Kevin, you're at a
no idea. That just finished. Ask me again in a year.
Is there infrastructure in the program maybe that enables them to stay in touch if they so choose? Because Kevin's at an alumni for, you said Microsoft, I think, and it's like so Microsoft is providing that infrastructure for alumnus to communicate. I wonder if any programs in mentorship and open source have that.
This past summer was a very big experiment that kind of happened on the fly. So I still work at Microsoft. That's my day job. The playing around at Johns Hopkins and now CMU, that's my night job. So we're still figuring this stuff out. There's everything that you've all expressed in terms of difficulty finding funding or support for the students, or how do you step outside of, I've now taught in 2 R1 universities, and I'm naive enough to actually know kind of sort of what that means and why I should be going and looking at City University, New York instead. But yeah, everything you're describing in your programs is the reality, and we're still just trying things. Sorry.
I think part of it might be a philosophical question for the open source community, right? Like, if we focus on the elite R1 schools, is that who you want your future maintainer population to look like? All valedictorians and salutatorians at all of the, at the high school, is that who you want? If that's who you want,
I'm pretty sure that would not be helpful.
Right. So, but if that's what you want, keep on doing what you're doing. But if you want other people, you have to consciously move the spotlight, focus a little bit wider, and focus on these other populations. I think doing the same thing over and over again is not going to be helpful. It's not. I think the future of open source is not the professors at Berkeley who
definitely not
Berkeley wearing Birkenstocks, right? Like, it's not. I don't think the future. It's evolving, so the future is not the past. So how do we keep on evolve with the tech industry and include more people, like consciously include more folks, right?
I think part of it is, and I think I forget who said it in the chat. I think Kendall, like the idea of partnerships and collaborations among these mentorship programs to give people the infrastructure that valedictorians at R1s get by default. would be great benefit. So you can stay in touch with your peers who mentored you, you learned from, you went through the same traumatic of your first exposure to an open source community, didn't like your pull request, you went through that shared trauma, and now you're your family, and grow that family outside of the R1s. I think that would be amazing.
I wanted to pull in, we have a question in the room that I wanted to make sure that we could sneak in before the end of the session. I know we're like almost at time. Yes, there is a physical presence here.
Oh, this is a really great discussion. It's a great thing.
So good, yeah.
Well, I actually have two questions. One is regarding the student body that we have here at UC Santa Cruz. So we're a Hispanic serving institution, although engineering is not necessarily Hispanic serving school within it. And I'm wondering how different sort of lifestyle expectations could benefit from, first of all, participating in open source and mentorship programs, because we have, so our Hispanic students, I mean, we have the range from, people with 2 professional parents, advanced degrees, to students where both parents and their families are migrant workers. And it's that end where they not only are studying computer science or something, but they're doing it within the context of contributing financially to their family, not wanting to move far away from their family. As I talk with students who say, well, I have to work in summer, or because it's not just for me, it's for my family, or when I get a job, I don't want to live more than an hour away because I want to be able to spend time with my family. When I have kids, I want them to grow up with grandparents. So it's very much that they're making decisions as part of a family, or part of a community, as opposed to this idea that you're going to go to school, you're going to get your degree, and then you're going to go out and look for the best job possible. So how does the open source environment, the opportunities in that, the kinds of mentorship you might receive fit with people trying to balance a tech career with a family and community participation and maintenance?
View it as an enabler. Open source is something you can participate in. It's an enabler if we can pay our mentees. Otherwise, it's something you can participate in remotely and in your lifestyle. You can plug it in versus having to go to a physical location, go to university, go do stuff that are expected of people with perhaps more ability to do so.
Will that lead to a job that also fits into that? Have you seen that in your students, that they have a broad range of tech opportunities afterwards?
I haven't had students, I've seen it in myself. Like in post-COVID with remote work, it's a little easier, but I'll let other people speak.
One thing that's helpful is just keeping track of local industries too. Like we have a lot of variety in what sort of projects we get, because like, for example, a lot of our students are in areas with a lot of agriculture. So we've tried to get more things related to ag tech or energy industry for a lot of our students who live places like that. And then also, as Jonathan said, the time commitment is also really helpful. We have our programs that start at 10 hours a week, which is a really big difference from the 40 hours a week. Yeah, how do you quit your part-time job and go do an internship for 3 months and then you're unemployed and you can't pay for anything? That's a big barrier to students. If you're a primary caretaker, how do you do a 40-hour internship? So yeah, the time commitment and making sure that you have accessible verticals that relate to what careers they would realistically go into.
From
go ahead, Kendall.
For the open source projects that I work on are all very global, big projects. And so there's an emphasis on understanding that somebody might not be present during your working hours, and your working hours aren't going to be somebody else's working hours, and you need to be patient with the communication. And I think that has set up a context of like remote work being like goes hand in hand with working on a lot of the open source projects that are at my foundation. So a lot of the companies that invest in our foundation and use our projects understand that, and we do continuous education of those companies and make sure that they know the requirements of an upstream developer in an open source project that are not going to be the same as somebody working internally on something. So yeah, it kind of I like am kind of trying to get at a point but can't quite articulate it, but hopefully you understand.
I would also add to the enabling factor of open source is if we're successful with the mentorship programs, and I think most mentorship programs have a DEI or less access sort of focus, which is awesome, we can hopefully line someone up who might speak English as a second language with someone who speaks their native first language. So the education is easier, the onboarding is easier, the access to knowledge is frankly easier. So there's so much opportunity with open source and these mentorship programs that doesn't come from a traditional path, from the time freedom to the just access to knowledge.
We designed our program from what the students want, which is a job, and then we worked our way from there. We didn't go from college here. We came from the other side, and I think also student expectations for a lot of students are different. One of the professors told me, hey, look, our students are coming from survival wage jobs. So, getting them a job that's double, is more than, students more than excited about that. And, an SDE job is fantastic. The expectations, I would say, would be different from like CMU students starting point, which is multiple offers from a FANG company or from FANG companies, right? And so our students, and like we have students that are able to get into FANG companies, just a little bit of a boost and with some mentors and stuff, and that's great. But we also have a lot of students that go into like the local power company or the local credit union, and retailers, Costco, hire 4 or 5 of our students, right?
That's awesome.
There's a lot of and it's great because like when I started this program, it's like, okay, our students need to be getting the exact same job as kids from Stanford, and it would feel bad when they don't. But then the professor comes like, hey, Kevin, you're looking at this at the glass half empty, right? Like, think about they're starting at a survival rate job and how tight that is on them and their family. And if you can double that, even if it's like an entry level front end or something, and it's at 60, 70 grand, they have so much more wiggle room in their life, in their finances. And it's, don't feel bad about that, right? Feel good about that. So I think just even the perspective of kind of like the student expectations is different, and lots of other things too, right? But that's just one sliver of that, of kind of designing a program from the ground up for the students we serve versus like trying to adapt a program, a mentoring program for students at the top 20 schools and trying to readapt it to our students. Just the directions and expectations, a lot of other things are going to be different. And the other one, sorry, we're over, but like mentors, there's training. Our mentors, are very different folks from our students, and they probably mentor our mentees in their social lives. We probably never meet our mentors and vice versa. And so how do you become allies? How do you do, we do a lot of training so that it's not just like, I think some of the other mentorship programs we've heard that Kevin, this is never going to work. Why? Oh, we do speed dating, and then like a year later, no one's in contact anymore, right? And then that was the only thing we got. We even paid for pizza, right? So like having that structure, having that intentionality is really, really important to serve the set of students that you want to serve.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think that's such a great point. We have another question here, and I also wanted to get to Stephen, but what I wanted to make sure we do first, we're already a little over time, is I wanted to give Onexi like a space. Like I had sent you questions that we didn't get to Onexi, and I wanted to just ask if there's anything as the student, we're all talking about like students and participants and contributors, and I wanted to make sure to save a moment for you to share anything, if there's anything else about your experience or coming up for you listening to this conversation.
Yeah, I definitely want to contribute to what everybody's saying as of right now, and kind of just bring up some points, bring up a point for the OSRE program over at Santa Cruz. I think that they definitely, the situation that was described before about the whole kind of having not only family and personal responsibilities, but also kind of trying to mix that in with trying to get out and get into opportunities. I can say that that's definitely firsthand my situation, and that's been going forward into the job market, something I'm looking for. And I think that the OSRE program definitely provided at least me for a new way of networking and being able to kind of get connections out there, being able to know what's in industry, and being able to open up myself to this new field of open source, which is definitely something that I'm looking to do in terms of remote work, but not close myself off to any kind of particular industry, but that open source really kind of dabbles into everything. So it really doesn't matter kind of what field you're kind of into, because in computer science there's a lot of things, right? There's like cybersecurity, there's software engineering, specifically web applications, native applications that are downloaded onto your computer, things that have to work with design. And I think all of those can be encompassed with a kind of open source community. And I think that the OSRE program really opened my eyes to that, and provided a great opportunity to reach out for that in the future. And I think I'm definitely more looking towards open source kind of industry opportunities as of right now. And that's something that I didn't even knew existed before.
Yeah, thank you so much, Onexi, for sharing a little bit about your experience. I could talk to y'all for the next 3 hours. This is such a fruitful and interesting conversation, but there's another session that is slowly encroaching on our room. And I know that I also only really asked you all for your time through 10 minutes ago. So even though we have like another question, we have way more to talk about. I think I'm gonna.
We have an unconference session on it. We have to set slot. Do you want to keep talking?
Yeah.
At 1:30.
So yeah, there's even more. Yeah, I'm reading the chat. Okay. Well, yeah. So I think I'll wrap it up there for now. But I just want to thank you all so much for like taking the time to join today. As I said, I'm so glad to know all of you and to, you know, get to know more about the different projects you're working on. Yeah, Stephen, right. Yeah, I would love to have more conversation about this. I wanted to hear more about your collaboration with Open Infra. So yeah, just thank you all so much. It was really great to have you. I hope that we can find places and spaces to continue this conversation and build. I will try and follow up with you all to find a channel for us to keep talking about this. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Take care, folks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stephen, we'll get you to Santa Cruz soon. You have to come up with an excuse to come.
All right. Bye.